Welcome everyone to the State of Social Procurement webinar series and part 3 of our conversation on the topic of build expertise. I'm Alison Carter, IPA Social Impact Manager, and I'm delighted to introduce yet another stellar panel of social procurement specialists. We have Sharon Morris, who's the General Manager of CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, Australia and New Zealand, also joined by Clayton Cleary, who's the General Manager of Commissioning, Procurement and Contract Management with New Zealand's Ministry of Health, and Fiona Sergi, who is the Manager for Social Procurement Capability with the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions in Victoria. So a warm welcome to you all. Thanks, great to have you. Also, very pleased to have James Muscat, IPA's Client Engagement Manager, joining once again. And James, as usual, will be helping to convene the polls and the questions. Before we proceed to the acknowledgement of country, I just wanted to share a slide showing you what to expect from today. All right, so first of all, we are recording. We've also enabled auto transcript, so you should be able to see the closed captions or activate the closed captions. We're going to be taking anonymous polls as usual during this conversation, so please do participate in that. It's really useful to get information about the types of people that are participating in the conversation. James also will be posting some useful links to, for example, the full report, which is hosted on the CIPS website, as well as recordings of the previous webinars that we've hosted as part of this series. And we do encourage you to post your questions using the Q&A tab, which is next to the chat tab. Then we will be able to take those questions halfway through and also at the end. So anytime a question pops up or occurs to you, please log it there. And also we welcome you to participate in the chat, of course. Just keep your comments on topic and respectful. So today we're focusing on procurement professionals. We've, as usual, got 3 sort of key strategic questions. How and why should procurement professionals help drive social value? How do we know values-based procurement works? And what enablers are available to realise social value? I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of Whadjuk Noongar land from where I'm hosting today's webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us on the call today and also everywhere. James, that's also a good time to run our first poll to get a sense of where people are joining from and what sector they represent. So let's launch that first one. Big turnout from government and policy development, it looks like. And there's a second question as well that you can see if you scroll down. Good to see that more than 3/4 of the audience are participating in the poll, which is great. Thank you. All right, let's share those results, James.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm coming on quickly to share the results with you. You should be able to see them. But as you can see, we have 52% of people in the webinar today coming from government or policy development, and then 19% from private and for-profit enterprise, and then 10% from charity and not-for-profit, and then a smattering of others there. And most of the people in the audience today are buyers, so 55%, followed by 26% that are not currently engaging in social procurement activity, and 16% are suppliers.
In a way, we kind of like it that there's a fairly substantive proportion not yet engaging in social procurement, because that's the aim for us, is to raise awareness and help grow that activity. Thanks, James.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so one more thing that we want to do, is to share a video which shows the overview of the state of social procurement research. So let me get that running for you. It's just a short video. Here we go. So there you have an overview, and it's time to get into our discussion. The first key question we want to ask is, how and why should procurement professionals seek to influence procurement strategies to help drive social value? And the findings in the report, and also as was shown in that video, is that a lack of knowledge and experience within buyer organisations was really the predominant barrier to carrying out social procurement activity. So given that barrier has been identified, and it's quite significant within buyer organisations, Sharon Morris, I'm wondering, are we speaking about a whole new skill set for contemporary procurement?
Hi, thanks for having us. Just excuse me a moment. I just want to firstly acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woi and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and they're whom I present from today. It's really great to be here. Really interesting question, Alison, because a lot of us think that if you that there are no new procurement skills really, there's just good procurement. Because if you put good procurement with a lens of creating social impact, and that's that value really going beyond that of the organisation, but really benefiting society or the environment. And it's never been so important as right now. And the current state of play for our members, CIPS members, is that the COVID environment is really sending shockwaves through our supply chains, and it's really signalling a time for transformation in what we do and how we procure. And it's really exciting times because we all know the general public are really appreciating how important supply chains are, especially when they're missing key goods. And you couple this with really the rise and influence of public opinion on what we spend our money on, ethical purchases, climate changes threatening our resources, all those elements. So this is a great time to think about social and also environmental impact. So the contemporary procurement professionals really, they direct, they advise, they manage change, a huge transformation. They lead and influence both internal and external stakeholders. And year on year, we do a survey around this. We're seeing the importance of soft skills. And, that's communications, internal stakeholder management, those influencing and negotiating skills, and especially supplier relationship management. So, our good procurement practitioners, they need to recognise compliance. So they need to know about policy and practice, but they also need to have that lens that, social enterprises may not have the time or the expertise to respond to some of the tenders. And also those influencing skills, and that's, really helping to identify within an organisation the value solution, the collaboration with suppliers and internal stakeholders. And also, our professionals need to know how to create sound business cases, they have to have those business cases based on evidence. So that brings us down to that measurement piece. They have to be able to measure and report on what they're doing. And I think kind of the overarching thing is the strategy. They have to plan so long, so much it happens that you do social procurement in an organisation, and procurement people are often the last to know about it. So getting them involved early and inspiring people around the organisation is really important. And I think probably sort of finally, equity, diversity, inclusion in this day and age, and recognising the positive contribution that ED&I makes to an organisation and what you do. And for us, also all of our members sign up to a code of conduct. So, that ethical e-learning that we do is really required, and procurement professionals, or the contemporary procurement professionals, really need to act as a role model and really champion for, ethical and sustainable practices. So, yeah, it's quite a lot to ask from a procurement professional, but it may not be about them conducting social procurement. It might just be about them doing good procurement.
Thanks, Sharon. And I also really appreciate that insight on the impact of COVID. So it's not just the natural evolution or norms around corporate responsibility and stakeholder value, but it's also when we're seeing circumstances come to the fore, such as has been caused by COVID, the influence that we're seeing that have on social procurement activity, as was identified in the report. Really interesting. If anything, it drove up social procurement. So Fiona, Sergi, what about compliance-based procurement? Where does that leave it?
Well, thanks, Alison. And I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri land in Melbourne's inner north, and pay my respects to the people of the Kulin Nation for their continued stewardship of this place I get to call home. So absolutely, compliance-based procurement still and will always have a place. For example, we have to have compliance with building codes and technical specifications and standards to ensure the safety and longevity of assets and those sort of things. But with values-based, that approach, we really do want to, I suppose, get more for our money. More bang for buck is really the approach. And I think, the community expects that from government as well, like to, get more from the public purse. So, there is that, ability to show additional value for the money that we spend, that we're not just buying a building or a widget, but that there's that potential for employment of marginalised groups. There's economic empowerment, the ability to keep money in local economies, and this can be done in a variety of ways. But really, it's about making it clear what you're wanting to achieve, and that you can do that in your procurement strategy in your organisation. And that might be, for example, looking at gender diversity in your supply base, or spending a percentage with an Aboriginal business, or as Sharon and Alison, you both touched on, the impact of COVID has really highlighted the impact on women and young people here in Victoria, and how we can, strive to, make an impact or difference through our procurement practices. And I think also the key thing is really making sure that you let the market know that this is what you're actually looking for in a supplier, so that they can understand how they can respond or how they can manoeuvre, if they need to provide that additional value.
Fantastic insights there, and probably a good opportunity now to ask the participants, the audience, whether they target impact areas and what those areas are. This is something that we've asked in each of our webinar series. So let's do that, James. Maybe we'll launch that now and just sort of get a sense of what areas are being targeted and what might be proclaimed to the market. The report certainly found that workforce recruitment and employment outcomes was dominant in target impact areas, which obviously relates very closely to the work that IPA does. Wow, nearly an 80% participation in these polls. That's so useful. Thanks. James, let's see those results.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So 80% of participants have put through their poll results. So thank you very much for that. The inclusive economy, you should be able to see there is 56% in terms of targets for procurement spend. And then we have 46% each for workforce and recruitment and environment, and then 41% for local economy, followed by other and not applicable as well.
Thanks, James, and thanks to everyone. So maybe we should be turning to our next question to clarify what we mean by values-based procurement. What is that distinction? And do we know that it really works? And we have a fantastic example, which I think will illustrate the opportunities for procurement professionals, but also reflects the opportunities that were flagged in the research, which was that values-based procurement is best placed in the hands of skilled and trained professionals who can incorporate those social outcome goals into procurement strategies, much as Sharon and Fiona mentioned there, and also performing their processes seamlessly and with the most impact on the communities they want to help. So if I read that, I think it sounds both inspiring and a little intimidating. So that's why it's very useful for us to have Clayton Cleary joining us now. Clayton, let's hear from you about the incredible efforts that you made with the mental health services with the Ministry of Health in New Zealand.
Thanks, Alison. Kia ora koutou, everyone. Hello from Wellington, New Zealand. So I guess it's important for me first to acknowledge that we had an incredible team that worked on this, and I can't get all the credit, and it's worth acknowledging those people because they really did push the boundaries. When we set off on this journey, we wanted to expand access to mental health and addiction services across New Zealand and develop services that would better meet the needs of individuals, families and communities. And we wanted to make sure that we targeted services and built providers that were going to be able to have the greatest impact. So, reach the people who were the hardest to reach and had the most to gain from the services. And that was incredibly important to us. So when we started off on that journey, we held nationwide meetings with both providers and individuals who wanted to help be part of that change. And we had over 700 attendees come to those. It was really important for us to have those. They helped us design the core elements of the services that would make sure that we could meet their needs. And it's really important that we bring communities and providers on that journey and take their experience, because they have lived experience and we don't necessarily see that. One of the key bits of feedback that was identified, and we've known from a procurement perspective that for the closer you get to the community with providers, the less, not necessarily capability, but time and resource they have to put into a bid. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that their bids are going to be poorer, but it just means they're focusing on the delivery. The delivery is what's important to them, and they don't necessarily have the time to put in all the effort for a shiny response. So we did a couple of things to kind of change that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But one of the other important things was it brought out that we had predominantly focused on European clinical models, and that had changed the way the providers would respond. And so they would respond based on those European clinical models just to kind of meet the funding criteria. So they weren't targeting their specific communities. They weren't delivering the outcomes that they knew they could because of the barriers we had essentially put in place. That gave us essentially the launching pad to try something new, to do something completely different. So from there, we developed and implemented a tikanga Māori approach. So we weaved in Māori protocols, processes, Māori language, te reo, and rituals, and that recognised the Māori worldview and the culture. We also adopted a visual metaphor of a waka journey as our procurement approach, and that kind of was to make it sing to those providers, to make it something real, something tangible, that they could see that we were looking at things in a different way and we wanted them to be on that journey with us. Through the engagement, we worked with providers and communities, and they helped us develop a service spec. We enabled providers to submit orally their tender responses in either te reo or in English, or a combination of both. And the importance of that was that storytelling is such a key component of Māori culture. It is one of the ways that they transmit knowledge. And we really wanted to elevate that and enable that and give people the best opportunity to tell their story and why what they were doing was important and how they could help us reach those outcomes we were looking to seek. So it's fully bilingual all throughout. The tender was fully bilingual. So if you submitted in te reo, whether it was verbally or written, we would respond in te reo as well. So coming back to meet people and talk the same language, and it was a fundamental change in kind of everything we've done, and really, really positive in terms of the feedback that we got on it. And it's certainly something we will look to replicate where possible again. Other things it did, we looked to address scale inequity. So we set up 2 provider streams. So a tuakana stream, or a big brother stream. So that was open to providers who had existing or previous experience within kind of delivering mental health services. And then a taina, so a little brother stream, or an incubator stream, so to speak. So that was for smaller or new providers who had they had developed ideas that would benefit from us being more involved and helping them cultivate something that could then be presented to be service ready or contract ready. So it was very time consuming, but obviously well worth it. From that, we got 35 submissions to the taina stream, 12 were progressed, 10 contracted, and one of those has already actually grown bigger service capabilities. And so we're seeing the benefit for providers of the approach. The services are unique within the Māori space as well. So like I said, they are targeted services. They are not your generalist services. They are very targeted at ensuring that we produce or reduce inequity of outcome, because we see that within Māori. We want to raise the outcome for Māori to be on a par for everyone else. And it's a critical thing for us to make sure that we are doing that in a culturally appropriate way when we are doing our procurement. One of the services that we've got is based on the metaphor of a hikoi, so a journey, which travels the length of New Zealand, and it's a literal and figurative hikoi. So the participants in the program, they're given pedometers, and the real benefit isn't necessarily that they're measuring their steps. It's the real benefit is the discussions they're having with the service providers while they're on the walk, the richness of those discussions, and how we can kind of see how it's impacting them and how it's changing them and taking them on a journey to wellness. And that's really what it's all about. And the last thing I'll kind of touch on here is the idea of contribution versus attribution. So we may not see the outcomes for a very, very long time. So they're longitudinal. But even when we do, it might not be the Ministry of Health that sees them, because the outcomes may be, better educational outcomes. They might be other social outcomes that we're seeing. And so it's the importance of kind of elevating yourself above the outcome of health to see the broader social outcomes that are possible and how you can contribute to those. That's really important.
Clayton, what a fantastic case study and beautiful program design as well. I feel like I was taken on a journey in itself. So thank you very much for providing such a rich illustration of that. Sharon, CIPS recognised this as an exemplary model in recent awards.
Oh, we sure did. Clayton and his team at the Ministry of Health, they actually won the Best Initiative to Delivering Social Value Through Procurement at the CIPS ANZ Awards in 2021. And these awards are judged by an independent panel of peers and practitioners. And so, I've got some fantastic quotes. I wish I could read them all, but, about the submission. But, the approach was so outstanding. And I think probably to what Clayton's mentioned, that genuine cultural respect and awareness is just so evident. And it also addresses the recipients on their terms. And I think that is absolutely a game changer in terms of rethinking their procurement processes. Other comments were around that, that view to a long-lasting care and support in vulnerable services. That's really key. And also the comments were around they designed a process that was not only compliant, fair and robust, but, the Kaupapa Maori and Indigenous approach, weaving in Maori protocols, processes, the languages that Clayton referred to and rituals, but, still kind of conforming to the New Zealand protocols or government procurement rules. So, I think this is just an outstanding contribution to procurement in the region, and things that we can learn across the region. But I think there's no surprises that they won that category, but they actually won the overall winner of the awards, and that just tells you where social procurement is within our region. That it's right up there. So yeah, outstanding award, and just well done to the team.
Yes, well done. And thank you very much, Clayton, for your time today, for sharing that. You must be very proud of the team, as you mentioned. I've put a little prompter up there in case this has sparked some questions for anyone. Please do place those in the Q&A tab if you like, or James can check if you've added those to the comments. And probably just a good time to recap what the key messages are. So far, we've heard that there is still room for compliance, but it needs to be adopted in a balanced way, much more integrated. Furthermore, that values or a values lens attracts value, and we've just seen that described so effectively from the ministry's model. And then also, I think something we've heard from Sharon and Fiona, as well as Clayton, is invite input. Don't presume that and don't expect all of the knowledge and all of the expertise to be within yourself as a procurement professional, or even within your procurement team. Source far and wide, just as you would when you're looking at the ecosystem or the potential market there. James, I haven't checked the chats because I've been talking and listening. Is there an opportunity for questions, or should we move on to the next topic, which is around enablers, which might prompt some more questions anyway?
Yeah, sure. We don't currently have any questions in the Q&A function, but we do have some input from people. So Winnie is commenting that oral histories are such important mechanisms for transferring information, and great to see Western knowledge systems acknowledging their validity. And Craig has commented that the best procurement professionals are good storytellers. They can adapt the easiest to the storytelling theme. And Marianne has said, well said, Sharon, the genuine cultural respect and empathy is evident. So congrats to Clayton and the team.
Fantastic, there you go. So let's talk about the enablers. Something that Clayton mentioned was the oral submissions, and the report does identify enablers and opportunities for procurement professionals to generate and attract greater social value in their submissions. And that included using digital tools and other process improvements, as well as targeting impacts and setting spend and targets within your program so that you can actually measure what you're achieving and you can build on those. Fiona, Sergi, is there something that we could encourage procurement professionals to start on their journey if they're not quite equipped to do something as ambitious or rich as Clayton just described?
Absolutely. And I think there has to be a starting point. And Sharon lightly touched on measurement and reporting when she started the conversation today. And I think it's a point of sometimes you don't know what you don't know, or even the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing in an organisation. So, you know, one of the great ways to you might find that you're already spending money with social enterprises or Indigenous businesses, but has anybody actually checked, or is anybody tallying it up and putting it forward as part of, you know, some annual reporting or, you know, to tell that story? So it's a great way to establish a baseline of that direct spend, and whether that's by, you know, suppliers or by categories. And you can verify that spend by checking in with organisations such as with, in particular, Indigenous businesses like Supply Nation or Kinaway, the Victorian Chamber of Commerce here, who have publicly available listings of their members and those businesses, including their ABN. So if you need to match them up with your invoices and that sort of thing, it's a really great way to reconcile that information. Or better yet, become a member of those organisations and let them assist you with not only baselining your spend, but connecting you with potential businesses that can service your requirements, and they can do that really well because they understand their members and what they can do and whether they can scale up and all of those sort of things. So it's a really, I suppose, a win-win you know, situation. But if we move away from some of those suppliers, and we talk about mainstream suppliers as well, you know, what you can do is ask them about what they do to be inclusive employers of choice. So what does their workforce profile look like, and how they can make changes to that to be more inclusive. So here in Victoria, we use model clauses, essentially, which are dropped into the procurement documentation to ask suppliers a wide range of questions about their inclusive employment practices. And it's also where we capture their commitments to employ, whether it's more women, more people with a disability, more people that have faced significant barriers to employment. And then, you know, we get the chance to put it in the contract and hold them accountable to it. But you've got to keep looking for those opportunities. Some of them won't automatically lend themselves to driving social value, but it might be about unbundling that procurement or carving out a discrete work package that might lend itself to a social enterprise winning that piece of work, you know, which starts them on their journey to winning more work and, you know, their long-term sustainability as a business.
I think those model clauses and any of those proactive questions that are asked in any of those transactional processes can really help solidify what's motivating the relationship. So an example is currently with IPA, we're seeking to identify who among our clients have engaged us on a social procurement basis, because many come to us because we're experts in recruitment without necessarily acknowledging that we're a social enterprise. And so that's something that we're doing too now. We've got our cover sheet on our terms of business that actively asks whether we as a social enterprise was a factor in your decision to engage us. And then that helps us know and understand how, from a social enterprise perspective, the social procurement mechanism is helping to grow our business as well. So yeah, sometimes just those formal kind of procedures can really help start a conversation and build awareness as well.
Absolutely.
And so another thing that we have heard, you also mentioned intermediaries such as Supply Nation, Kinaway. Part two of our conversation last month also featured Social Trade as one of the other partners in this program, and really great to see how their membership is also growing. And so, yeah, that's part of it too, isn't it? Once again, don't presume that you need to have all of the expertise. Tap the ecosystem and see where those resources are to make your job easier and to start on that journey.
100%. So that's what they're there for.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we could talk beyond some of these technical and process changes, the approach to relationships or approach to leadership. And Clayton, I think you mentioned something previously around your team composition. I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. So, yeah, important when we're looking at kind of the team composition. Value alignment is always key in building a team that's going to be cohesive and kind of put ego aside and drive to a greater good. And particularly when we're looking at social procurement, that's kind of the objective of it. But aside from that, it's bringing in sometimes dissenting voices that, while their values are aligned, have different perspectives. And that might be because they have lived experience, that might be because of different cultural competence they have as well. And so it's really important that when you're kind of looking to solve the jigsaw puzzle of your team, that sometimes you look for pieces that are outside the box, because they will help you round that out. You have to be challenged when you're doing things like this, because we know what we know. And if people aren't asking us hard questions, then we're not going to look for the answers for them. We're always going to kind of go, well, we can meet this objective. But the question we want people to challenge us on is, but what if we pushed harder? What if we had more ambition? What if we tried something else? And bringing in relevant culture, relevant experience to actually do that lets us kind of experiment a lot harder, a lot faster, and bring things, bring fruit to bear that we may have thought wasn't possible, because we've just opened ourselves up to that challenge and gone, well, what if?
Fiona, how about your advice on taking those courageous steps like Clayton just set out there? Sometimes people don't feel that they have the freedom to fail or the freedom to ask.
No, and it can be a challenge. And even just listening to that, Clayton, about having somebody else that's going to ask the tough questions. Sometimes we can live in a bit of a bubble, and we need to make sure that we're influencing and collaborating as much as we can, and advocating, sometimes against the tide. So it can be a challenge. But some of the things that can help support driving social impact within an organisation are the values that organisation might have themselves. And in the report, obviously corporate social responsibility comes up. So where there's a CSR policy within an organisation, can really kick things off in terms of that ability to walk the talk, I suppose, is where I'm heading with that. And looking for those other policy levers to start a conversation. So do you have a reconciliation action plan in place? Do you have gender targets as an organisation to meet? And then let procurement help you take those initiatives to the next level. So it is really about walking the talk and putting your money where your mouth is, I suppose, living those values. The other thing also is to find a champion, which the report also talks about as well, or a sponsor to advocate at that leadership level to help bolster the movement. So a good place to start is with like-minded individuals. And then even if it's the authors of those policies, so the author of the CSR or the Reconciliation Action Plan, and their managers, because they obviously had to write those for a reason. So, tap into that as, a way to expand the conversation.
Thank you. Sharon, any other additional comments on how social procurement champions might be able to use organisational architecture or those other mechanisms to really activate leadership for greater social value?
Yeah, you're probably building on Fiona's tactics. I think it comes back down to the soft skills and why they're so important for a procurement professional, because too long we've been focusing on risk and price for many years, and now we're adding this kind of social environmental lens to it. And it's actually a new language, and it's a whole new influence and an exciting time to be part of the profession. So, you know, to Fiona's point, that internal engagement and understanding is absolutely integral. And you have to get executive buy-in. If the organisation strategy is not focused on social impact, and then social procurement is going to be really, really struggling. So back to the both speakers have mentioned values, and that is where it's key. If it's not in the DNA of your organisation, it's going to be ultra difficult. So having that influence that everybody is talking about, why social impact, social procurement, well, why social impact is important, and how procurement professionals can deliver on this is so important. So those soft skills are absolutely integral. You know, change management, we've spoken about them, influencing, speaking the language of the business. So not just a procurement, but understanding the whole strategy. And, you know, as I mentioned before, the communication and the relationship building is key. And to what Fiona endorsed before, the measurement, you know, if it's measured, it can be managed. And, you know, as leaders of the professional body, ultimately it's about finding the right people with the right capabilities to navigate the procurement needs. So, you know, as the professional body, you know, we're seen to cement what we call as a standard of the profession across the region. And, you know, we see that as CIPS, and that's considered a standard for the profession. So, you know, anyone qualified in procurement, really, it should be no different to a CPA or a lawyer or other certified professional. We need certified professionals in procurement delivering of a high standard for social procurement and procurement in general. So, you know, what I'm probably most excited about in terms of from a leadership perspective and leaders from procurement is that focus that we've heard throughout the discussion, that collaboration, the strategy, the developing strong partnerships, the communication. So, you know, and all of this while being, you know, an ethical and civic-minded professional, I think is really important. So, you know, really, really happy to help, I suppose, in that aspect as well from a training point of view from CIPS as well.
And I guess that's another point. There's another resource within the ecosystem, if not intermediaries for carrying out your social procurement, it's framing your skills and developing your skills as an ethical procurement professional and understanding how that role fits within the broader corporate responsibility framework. Yeah, fantastic observations. So I think we already have a couple of questions that have come through, but so far on the topic of build expertise, we're hearing you can build off your targets, look to build a balanced team, and definitely build a support network and look far and wide for those sources of support as well. James, I wonder, shall we launch some questions?
Absolutely. We do have a question for the panel from Elizabeth. So Elizabeth is wondering if the panelists have any thoughts around the use of supplier targets versus a more principles-based approach, particularly in the context of work that takes place outside of New Zealand and Australia, for example, in developing countries.
I wonder if Elizabeth is referring to categories, targets for supply categories. That's how I understood the question, but I'm not the procurement professional in the room.
It's actually a tricky question because we're talking about complex supply chains that exist outside of the regulation of Australia or New Zealand. So sometimes setting targets might not be appropriate, and that's I think what I was alluding to before, that not every procurement is going to lend itself automatically to social impact. But I suppose it would be more about potentially, and I think if I'm reading Elizabeth's question right, about looking from that ethical supply chain and looking at where there might be modern slavery or other elements of the supply chain that look a bit murky, but that is quite a deep dive to go down to every single level of those supply chains to then understand where you might be able to make improvements. But I think depending on what that is or what type of purchasing is happening there, like if it was clothing versus something else, it's actually really about understanding the supply chain and what improvements could be made there.
That's probably also always going to tie into an organisation's sustainability. If they're the type of large enough organisation to be importing from developing countries, for example, where labour laws may not be as well developed, or climate protection and environmental protection, then looking also to those other mechanisms to frame approaches for procurement is probably the way to go. A lot of the messages that I've heard from organisations such as social traders is to start small and to identify an area where you believe that you can at least contribute to some kind of direct or tangible outcome. And that's why many people do focus on the local economy or economic inclusion within their own sphere of operation, for example. Any other ideas or comments from Clayton or Sharon on that?
Just, thinking about, targets and spend targets, focusing on that kind of area, it's important that we think about driving behavioural change amongst, amongst the profession, and, all focused on, well, what is the outcome too? What do we want to achieve? So, just kind of thinking from that sort of target spend perspective is probably just my comment.
I think there is a tension there between targets and outcomes, and understanding where a spend target is supposed to translate into an outcome. Some organisations only go so far as to identify the spend target without really understanding or being able to report on the outcomes, which is what Fiona was referring to before. So yeah, that's part of the evolution of this social procurement activity within Australia and New Zealand, and hopefully we'll see that. We have the opportunity to explore the capacity within benefit suppliers to measure outcomes and provide that information to their to the organisations that they're supplying to, and that's going to take place in our next conversation. So hopefully we'll be able to build on that, and it's certainly something, as I've mentioned in other webinars, that I'm focusing on too as the social impact manager for IPA. James, any other questions or comments that you'd like to share? Otherwise, it might be appropriate for us to draw the discussion to a close for today.
Yeah, sure. We do have one final poll that I can launch if you would like, just so that people can, talk about or choose which areas that they would like to potentially learn more about and deepen their awareness on.
That's a good idea, actually, because we haven't had time to launch that in previous discussions. So let's launch that one. It might give us an opportunity to develop further discussions and services for everybody. This refers to some of those mechanisms that Fiona referred to as well, the reconciliation action plans or other sustainability frameworks. Oh, great. Lots of activity. Loving this. Sustainable Development Goal Guidance is a leader, along with social procurement strategy guidance and social outcomes indicators. Yeah, it's quite a topic close to my heart.
So we have about 81% now 86%.
Wow.
Thank you, everyone.
I wish we had time to ask this question in the other webinars, James.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
That's all right.
I'll end the poll and share the results now so everyone can see that.
Great, thanks. So yeah, social outcomes indicators and tracking guidance is the most predominant request. Strategy guidance and SDGs. We're going to see the Sustainable Development Goals become even more prominent as we approach 2030, I imagine. And I know that the Australian United Nations SDG, no, now I'm forgetting what they're called.
And we actually have an additional question that's just come in, Alison.
Right.
It's a great one. So someone would like to hear about the thoughts about how procurement professionals and the diversity within teams doesn't always reflect the diversity we want to see in our supply chains. For example, gender, Maori, Pacifica, and Indigenous, and how we could actually help break those barriers.
Yeah, that's a point that Clayton made as well. You almost broke the mold there, Clayton.
Yeah, so I guess it's also looking outside of those existing skill sets within procurement, but recognising that there are transferable skills from other similar type professions that we can bring and mould and bring diversity of opinion, diversity of thought, gender diversity, ethnic diversity in, by looking outside the procurement sphere for transferable skills. It's, kind of that we talked about the hard skills of procurement before. We can train those. The soft skills, we can't, they're inherent in somebody. And so recognising those soft skills and bringing them to the profession is how we've looked to address some of that.
Thank you.
I think there's also, I feel I'm lucky to work for a government agency that, talks about unconscious bias training for all people that are doing recruitment, so that you can actually, bring that to the table when you're recruiting and interviewing, and making sure that you do as much as you can, make sure that you have representation on the panel to recruit the right people, and, bringing that diversity of thought, but also, even going that one step further and redacting people's names and, doing a lot of other, really impactful things that can change people's thoughts about who you're hiring and what strengths you're bringing into the team, but having that based on, the actual person's skills and their experience, as opposed to their name or their gender or their age even.
And
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, really good point.
If I could just add to that from a professional body perspective, our role really is in this space is to amplify the good work that people are doing, like Clayton and Fiona are doing with their teams. And what is so important and what we're actively doing at the moment with a couple of steer co's across the region is developing a list of subject matter experts in this space, Indigenous and Maori and Pacifica speakers that we can engage with and they can speak on behalf of others. So I think that's really important. So often we hear about others speaking in this space, but to get actually Indigenous and Maori people talking to this topic is really important. So we need to build those lists. And we need to amplify people and push people onto the stage to have these discussions. So that's really important in getting that diversity of thought out as well.
Great insights from everyone there. Thank you. James, any other questions popped up?
No further questions from any participants at the moment.
So we do have the opportunity to receive further questions. You can email me, alison.carter@ipa.com.au. You can speak to James and I through one of our email addresses that we've set up. So why don't we share that information now? But also I wanted to draw your attention to the fact of what's coming up next, which is the CIPS conference, the annual conference taking place in March, 15th and 16th of March in Sydney. And IPA is presenting in one of the panel discussions, but it's the most incredible program. Sharon, I was looking at it again yesterday, and it's really, renowned for attracting such eminent speakers. And that's, I guess, part of the opportunities now to be sharing those examples and elevating those experts within the field. It's not only on social procurement, of course, it's on procurement as a broad profession now. Sharon, any comments there on the conference? I'm not sure if we have a special offer as well for those people who've registered.
We do. I've just shared in the chat function as well. So it's on the 15th and 16th of March. There's a virtual and a face-to-face option. Loving the fact that we're finally back face-to-face and we've got many people attending. So there's a networking dinner as well, which is hugely popular right now. So there's 15% discount, and I've just got the code in the chat function there. So looking forward to seeing everybody. and a lot of diversity of thought, a lot of innovation coming out. And of course, we want to be challenged. We want to challenge the profession. So looking forward to that debate as well. So can't wait.
Thank you. Well, everyone, that winds up part 3 of our discussion around build expertise. I hope it has planted a few seeds and stirred a little bit of inspiration as well as raise your awareness. When we close this webinar, you'll be directed to a survey, very quick questions just to gauge how this conversation has helped you deepen your awareness on the topic. We would love you to respond to that as you've been so active in the conversation today. Also, please, as I mentioned, contact us, socialprocurement@ipa.com.au, if you have any questions or suggestions of how we may build this conversation and provide any further guidance. And now I guess it's just to encourage you to follow the Ministry of Health New Zealand, the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions, as well as CIPS if you're not already, on their social pages, as well as IPA. And please do acknowledge our partners. Delighted to have Sharon from CIPS today in the conversation. Also our own social procurement champion, James. Thank you again for your help. And please note, Akina, Centre of Social Impact at Swinburne, and Social Traders also are part of this program. So any way you can keep joining the conversation and helping to raise awareness, we're always so grateful. And all we can say for now is stay safe, and we'll see you next time.